Hey, all you rad dads out there.
Sam, thanks for coming on the Rad Dads show. I'm going to start. I'm going to start the way we always do and ask, who are you?
I'm Sam Thompson. I host a podcast in Winnipeg called Witchpolice Radio. It's a music podcast I've been doing for 9 years now, which is ridiculous.
Yeah.
And it's kind of an in-depth interview show covering Manitoba and Manitoba adjacent musicians of all genres. And yeah, it's I can't stop now. I'm in too deep, so it's going to keep happening.
No kidding. I was just looking today. You're on like episode 600. What I wrote it down here somewhere.
I just released 641 tonight when we're recording.
Okay.
So yeah.
Oh, crazy. 641 episodes. Crazy. You're like, I can't believe how much content you put out. And you're also a dad.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So how many kids do you have?
I have 2 kids, 8 and 12.
Okay. Names, are you able to share names?
Yeah, sure. Liz and Olivia. Liz is the older one. Olivia's the youngest. So 2 girls.
2 girls.
And yeah, that's it makes doing the podcast thing and putting out so much content even more fun when you have to juggle, work and life and kids, as I'm sure you know.
Yeah, well, no kidding. Like that's the thing. See, I always blame my lack of productivity on our own show, on like my kids and just having too much going on. But now I can't because you do it. So let's talk about that. How do you do it?
I don't know. I think I just fit it in whenever I can. I mean, I typically try to record my interviews after they're in bed. It doesn't always work. It often gets interrupted by, someone coming down and tapping me on the shoulder in the middle of a conversation, but usually it works out all right. So I do 2 nights a week of recording typically, and I release 2 episodes a week on different days as well. So it's kind of just become a routine. I don't know how much of the history of the show you want me to get into, but it was very different when it started.
Get into it.
Well, it first when I had my first kid, so I was she's 12 now, I'm 39, so I was quite a bit younger then. And I'd been playing in bands basically my entire life from grade 7 up until basically around the time I became a dad. And it was sort of a way, doing the show at first, it was me and 2 friends who I had played music with for years. And we just sat around and listened to records and talked about records. The interview part wasn't there yet. And it was basically a way for me to stay in touch with them and with being a nerd about music, even though my life was completely overtaken with being a relatively new dad. And that's pretty much how this started. So it was really just, I want to stay involved. I don't have time to be in a band anymore. And I wasn't that good in the first place. But this was kind of a way to
know that feeling.
Right. I'm still part of something, right? So that was basically how it started. And it's become very different over the years. And I mean, now it's an interview show and it's a lot more focused, but yeah, it was really just a way to once a week hang out with some friends. Right.
And so it's really evolved over time. I mean, you've won awards, put out lots of content. One of the reasons I'm so interested to talk to you, in addition to kind of finding out your experience as a parent, but it's kind of this thing. I feel there's a bit of a connection between what we do and what you do, is kind of this connection to your community, right? Like, it's so cool to me that you have this now 641 episodes, which are like a real, I don't know if the word is time capsule, or it's like a, just this amazing collection of interviews and content all about kind of Manitoba and Winnipeg. Yeah. And that's just so amazing. Communities like other communities and other places don't have that.
Well, that was kind of the idea too. When the reason it's called Witchpolice Radio is because years before I started even knew what a podcast was, I had been in a band with a friend of mine who ended up being one of my original co-hosts of the show, called Dynamo, and we had a song called "We Are the Witchpolice." The origin behind the name is much more complicated and stuff than that. It really doesn't mean anything. It's just like a throwaway joke a friend made once, and I wrote it down because I thought it was a funny word. But anyway, we had a song called "We Are the Witchpolice," and we didn't play a lot of shows, so I needed to put it online somewhere somehow so people could hear it. And this is pre-Bandcamp, pre all that stuff.
Yep.
So I made one of those free blogger sites, and I thought I'll put it here, then people can go here and hear it. And I had to name it something.blogger.com. So I just put Witchpolice because that was one of the song titles. Yep. And then that turned into not just my own stuff. I thought, wait, I have all these other bands I was in dating back to the 90s. I should upload all that stuff on there too.
Yep.
So Witchpolice kind of kept growing the blog. And I got friends giving me all their old tapes from basement bands that had long since died and would have been lost to the the ether,
Yeah,
I guess, if I hadn't preserved them. So it became this like weird archive of really strange punk bands and ska bands and like folk stuff, and just mostly from people I knew. And then that morphed into the podcast. So that kind of goal of preserving all this stuff that otherwise would be forgotten has sort of carried on into the interview side of things, because now there's tons of bands I've had on the show over the years who are now defunct. Right. So that might be the one interview they ever did, and maybe that's a value to someone who hears them 10 years down the road and wants to find out about them. So I hope it does that.
Yeah, there's kind of like a documented history now.
Yeah,
it must be neat for you you probably have people that you talked to early on who now are, you said, maybe not playing in a band now, but maybe I imagine there's lots of people who are playing in different bands now, and you're having them on multiple times and kind of seeing how the community, I mean, the music community, I think it's pretty similar everywhere. Like it's a little bit incestuous in that way, right? Like we all kind of like, you end up in a band with those people who move on to a band with those people. And so that must be sort of neat to see over time too.
Yeah, it's cool to track it. You sort of, someone I talked to in 2015 is now doing something totally different with another guy who I talked to in 2017 with their old bands, and it's becoming a new thing. Yeah. And I guess the other piece of it too is like my background is in journalism. That's what I do as a full-time job now.
Okay.
But at the time I started the podcast, I was out of it. I used to be a newspaper reporter. The newspaper business kind of went to shit in the mid 2000s, and a lot of people were losing their jobs, me being one of them. And so I decided to completely do a shift and go over to working in PR, which was a nightmare, and I loathed it. But I did it for 10 years. So doing the podcast kept my one foot in the music scene and one foot in journalism, because I do think of it as a journalistic project. For sure. I was doing these two things that I love, even though I couldn't do them, in the regular way I'd been doing them before. And so now I'm back working in journalism full time for the past few years. And I think that doing the podcast really helped for that, because it kept me sharp. It kept my interview skills, active, and I was doing this twice a week anyway. So it sort of was an easy transition back into doing news. Right.
Yeah, it's so neat. Like, I kind of want to pick up on that thing that you said about like you've kind of got had a day job that was totally unrelated, but this kind of allowed you to stay connected to that community. Like, I think that's so important, right? And I think for people. You're a musician. You kind of said
I was kind of a musician, but
yeah.
I played in bands. Yeah, I don't know if I'd call myself a musician, but yes.
Well, it's kind of similar to me. Like you have that past, and that's an important thing. Like I think for some people, it's very hard to just put it aside, set it down, and move away from it. And so to be able to stay connected in some way, because as life goes on, not everybody gets to have the opportunity for whatever reason. Maybe it's your family, and maybe it's just circumstance. There's not people around you end up playing with, but you get away from it. This is kind of a neat connection with that community still, right? And to sort of be up to date with what's sort of going on in that community is really cool.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if this is the same experience you had, but a lot of my friends, really the majority of my friends, are somehow related to the music scene, even going back to my first bands in the mid 90s and stuff. Like some of those people I still talk to. And it just seems like everyone that I have been close to since I was in junior high has somehow been involved in local music. So it kind of made sense. Even though I wasn't playing in bands anymore, it seems weird to kind of not hang out with those people anymore. So I'm still involved despite being old and busy with kids and stuff, and not going to shows, not even close to as much as I used to, but it still works.
Definitely not in the last couple of years.
No, obviously. No one has. Yeah,
it's crazy. So that's amazing. Like I just find it totally fascinating how you're able to kind of keep this. You're kind of like the historian of like Manitoba culture, but you're also a dad. So this is the Rad Dad show. Do you consider yourself a rad dad?
I think so. I mean, I like to think I am. I hope I am.
So what's a rad dad?
Well, I think it's a dad that is interesting and does fun stuff that when my kids are older, they might look back on and think, oh, this is really cool. Right now, the fact that I was in the band before, they've seen some videos of it and stuff, and they don't really know what to think. But maybe, when they're teenagers, if they start their own bands, like I hope happens, maybe they'll want to watch a video of that again or listen to a tape again and say like, oh, look, my dad was in this terrible band. But it was something that he was passionate about and interested in. And same with the podcast too, right? They don't really care about the music scene now, but they may become involved in it at some point down the line. And then they might want to look up some of these old bands and hear what I had to say with them and check out those interviews.
Right. Yeah. I think I like that. Part of, and this is, I kind of hinted at this earlier, but kind of the connection to the community. So I don't know how much you know about Rad Dads Edmonton. Like, it started about 5 years ago by Christian, who also co-hosts this podcast. He started this podcast, and really kind of the whole idea was kind of connecting to the community. And it was really about like, I'm a dad. I want to continue to do fun stuff that I like, you know, go to shows and go skateboarding and stuff like that. I want to be able to enjoy that with my kid, or at least expose my kid to it and give other people that opportunity, because there's not that much opportunity for that kind of stuff. And it's really about kind of, I think in essence, the original idea was kind of like, you know, maintaining that in that sense of yourself, right, as a parent, which a lot of people struggle with, I think. And so almost a little bit selfishly, I think, was kind of like, well, I can do these fun things and put on these events so I can do the things I want to do and bring my kids along. And it's kind of, I think, but it's cool because it's kind of turned into, you know, something that can sort of just be shared with the whole community. And we raise money for charity, you know, with most of the events that we do and stuff like that. And the podcast is kind of part of that too. Like, we want to talk to people we're interested to talk to, people we are kind of inspired by and think what they're doing is cool, and just find out their experience of being a dad. And that's just sort of something that comes up a lot, is that that individuality, right? And kind of what makes you rad. So that's one kind of definition, but everybody has their own definition, I guess, of what's a rad dad.
I like how you've built a community around it, though. That's really cool, because I mean, I think that Winnipeg obviously has a lot of dads. I mean, among my friend group too, I know a lot of dads who are still trying to do that, trying to be individual and do their creative things and stuff. But the fact that you guys have gone the next step and kind of, you know, organized around it, I think is very cool.
Well, it's kind of neat. Like, it's neat to see, before the pandemic, we had a couple, within the span of a few months, had a couple, we called them all ager ragers. So be a punk show. Yeah. And so one of them, we just had, you know, a few local bands, but you could bring your kids. So there were a whole bunch of like kids in the, you know, kind of toddler mosh pit or whatever with ear protection on, full on punk show. And then one, we had kind of a battle of the bands. We had some kid bands and some dad bands play. Cool. Yeah, it was really neat. And, you know, it's just like, yeah, you can do it. You can make this happen. And one thing I've sort of felt is, my kids are, so at least my oldest, Elise, she's just about 6. She's starting to kind of take interest in what I'm interested in, or at least like is curious about, like, why is dad into this stuff? What does he like about music? What's this Rad Dad show thing? And so kind of asking those questions. So I kind of want to turn that back to you. Like, there's kind of this deep connection to your community where you're from. What do your kids think about that? How important is that for your family, I guess, to sort of be intimately connected with your community?
Well, I think that my kids are interested in it, but without really knowing what it is that I do. They know I'm interviewing people. They know I'm talking about music. I mean, they've seen my records and everything. They know I'm obviously a big nerd about that stuff, and they're curious about it for sure. But I mean, they wear my merch. Right. The kids wear the shirts and hoodies and toques and stuff to school. So whatever they think about it, they definitely are proud to support it, I think, which is really cool. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's interesting trying to juggle the creative side of things with the dad side of things, because it does take up obviously a large part of everyone's life who has kids. Yeah. And you know, trying to do something and put a lot of effort into something that is apart from them, while not overtaking your dadness. Right. That's kind of the struggle, I think.
For sure. Yeah. So how do you, so we've talked a little bit about this, like, I think this is funny. I think a lot of people don't realize. So if someone came upon your show, they stumbled upon Witchpolice Radio, holy shit, there's 640 episodes. Wow, this is amazing. Like, this guy must do this full time. Like, I think a lot of people don't realize most, you know, independent podcasts, even if you're on a smaller network or whatever, like, you're doing this kind of off the side of your desk. You're doing it at night after your kids go to bed. Like, so you're doing your interviews at 9, 10, 11 p.m. You have to edit all those yourself.
Again, when they're in bed too, is when I do all that stuff as well.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Right. And posting on social media and all the stuff that sort of has to go along with that. People don't really realize. So yeah, tell me a little bit about how you kind of achieve that balance, I guess.
I think it's, well, one of the other things that I'm involved with is we have a Manitoba podcast festival, and there's a very strong, again, with that community thing, there's a very strong community that we've built up over the past 4 or 5 years of local podcasters of all genres. And many of us are in the same position. We have kids, all of us have full-time day jobs. We're all juggling these things. And I think that kind of, I'm not really sure how to explain it, but that has really helped, is having a community there as well. Kind of so I'm not just doing the music community, but yeah, that supports. And, you know, we'll often just send messages to each other asking about some mundane podcast question, and everyone jumps on and helps. And I think that seeing other people who are in the same boat, some of them have older kids than me, some of them have way younger kids than me, and just realizing that we're all trying to make something worthwhile and making it work with everything else that's going on in our lives. I think it's I don't know if that's an answer to your question, probably not, but it helps in a big way, I think, to see that I'm not the only one doing this, you're not the only one doing this. You know, this DIY spirit that we all have from growing up in the 90s and playing in punk bands and stuff, that has continued in a bunch of weird forms for a bunch of different people. But I think that if I can somehow impart that idea onto my kids of, you want to make something, go make it. Yeah, whatever it is, I don't care. You know, it doesn't matter if I understand it. Like, you know, I'm not a video game guy. My kids love video games. They make animations and stuff, and that stuff is not something I'm familiar with, but I encourage the shit out of it. Like, I mean, they don't, I think the problem a lot of parents have, and I did at first too, when I first had kids, was like, oh, I want to make them into a mini me. I want them to like all the records I like. I want to take them out of these shows, and they like some of that stuff, but they also like their own things. And I hope that seeing the amount of effort I put into this as a hobby on the side will encourage them to do their own things in the same way.
Yeah, I think it's like, I kind of alluded to it before, but like seeing you be passionate about something gets them excited, like regardless of whether they give a shit about it, right? Like it's good, I think, for them to see you be passionate about something, right? I kind of like what you said about kind of the DIY thing. I hadn't really in my head made that connection, but it is very similar to kind of, you know, the kind of DIY punk scene.
It is. It's just punk rock with a microphone instead of on stage. Like, it really is the same. I think of it anyway as the exact same thing. And
kind of like the old. No, I was going to say like the old school sort of. Everybody who's out here doing this, like, because you're kind of doing it off the side of your desk, and you have to be committed, and you have to, you know, find the time. You're working on it late at night. Like, because of that, it has to be something you're passionate about. Like, I'm sure I saw a statistic somewhere about, like, you know, most podcasts like fail after 3. I shouldn't say fail. They just are discontinued after like 3 episodes or something.
I was actually going to bring that up. That exact. I don't know if that's it. I don't know what the number is, but yes, that's that. And I think that what happens is people do this because they hear a high profile celebrity doing a podcast and they see they've got millions of downloads or whatever. Yeah. And then they make their episode with their friend in the basement talking about whatever, and they get 2 listens, and they think, well, this is a waste of time. No one cares. And it's like, well, no one's going to care, whatever it is. You write a book, you do a painting, you record an album. Odds are your friends and family might hear it, might read it, might watch it, and then that's it. And you have to keep building on it to get to the point where other people want to hear it. So I think that there's a lot of people who get into podcasting who quit right away. And I think it's unfortunate, because I bet a lot of those people had some really good ideas. And if they had just stuck with it, it could have become something. So I think that's another good lesson for kids too, right? Is to see, like, okay, my dad's been committed to this for some ridiculous amount of time. You know, like, obviously there's something that there's a reason why he's so passionate about this. Maybe, you know, whatever it is that they're going to be into, maybe they'll take that the same way and do the punk rock thing with it, even if it's not punk rock.
Yeah, a lot of people sort of say, like on this show, a lot of people sort of say, like, it's not really about what you say to your kids, but it's about what you show them, how you kind of model things, right? And I think you're right. Like, sort of showing them that it can be done is so valuable too. And yeah, they're interested in it. They think it's cool that you're passionate about something. So you kind of model that for them, which I think is such a neat and important thing. So you became a dad. What year?
2009 was my first daughter, and then 2013 was the second one.
And so kind of right around the time your podcast was starting. So this has kind of been a part of their lives, basically their whole lives.
They know I do something twice a week. It was once a week at first, but it's grown to twice a week now. Yeah.
Right. And you're doing kind of some short form interviews that you're throwing in there too, right? You're just kind of making it happen. Like,
yeah, I've done 8 of them now. I call them quick hits. It's basically 4 10-minute interviews with a lot of the time it's bands that I'm not very familiar with, or they're new on the scene, or someone messages me and says, I have my first single out. Can I be on your podcast? And usually in the past I would say, well, wait till you have more stuff so I have more to talk to you about, because I don't want to spend 30 to 45 minutes talking about one song. That's all I can base my listening on, and to try and get questions for you. But this has kind of been a way to get those people on the show anyway and help them, because the whole point of doing this is that I want people to hear these bands, right?
Yeah.
I don't want them to hear me as much as I want them to hear the artists I'm interviewing. If someone's on my show, it's because they played me some music that I think is really cool. And I hope that other people will check them out, and then that'll help them in their, creative endeavors too. So finding a way to kind of fit in those new bands was pretty cool.
Yeah, that's a really cool idea. So I was going to sort of ask you, I guess, kind of bring it back to some of the dad stuff. Becoming a dad, how did that sort of change Sam Thompson? What changed about you when you became a dad?
I think it for any dad, it changes everything, right? I mean, it's like day and night. One day you're just some 20-something doing whatever and having fun, and then suddenly you have you have all the responsibility in the world. I mean, I would never I think it's the best thing I ever did is to be a dad, honestly. Cool. And I had a good childhood, and I think that a lot of the things that my dad did with me, I have really strong positive memories of. And so trying to do those things with my kids, like going to the library, I take my kids to the library constantly. And that kind of thing was a huge deal when I was growing up. So having the ability to do that and pass that on, it makes me happy. It makes me feel like I'm accomplishing something, because, I want to just hang out and play with them too, but doing some of these kind of things that made an impact on me growing up, it feels like I'm doing the right thing. You know what I mean? Like to pass that on. So, I mean, I always wanted to be a dad. So it was never, I always kind of thought one day I'll have kids. So now that I do, it's sort of, okay, this is what's going on. I want to be, the best dad I can, and be involved in their lives and help them learn about things. And it's fun. Like, I mean, it's not always easy, but it's fun.
Yeah, it is really fun. It's neat that you kind of, are relating some of your memories as a kid to some of the things that you're doing. I think that's so cool. Even when you said library, like, it kind of took me back to, I grew up in Medicine Hat, Alberta, and kind of made me think about going to the Medicine Hat Public Library as a kid. And it's so cool to be able to give those experiences to your kids, and you can almost kind of imagine what's going through their mind and how they're sort of seeing it.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and I think that something might something that because I just trying to think about how I got into doing what I do with the music stuff. And my dad he doesn't have anymore. He passed most of them on to me, but he had a huge record collection when I was a kid, and we listened to music all the time. And I would go with him to record stores like a baby, when you buy albums. And so the fact that he was interested in music really was a big deal growing up, because he was curious about what I was listening to. He hated a lot of it, but he still, the fact that he had like interest and wanted to know what was going on, and he went to some of my shows and my early bands as a teenager and stuff, and that really kind of helped me. This become an important thing for me, right? It's like, well, my whole life this has been cool. Music's been something that it's normal to be passionate about, and I mean, I've taken it way farther than he ever did. Right. Like to an obsessive level, and he never played any instruments or anything, but I mean, it just that the idea of this being around. And I mean, the fact that it was normal in our house, the fact that he's, listening to the same Neil Young albums I listen to today, like, it was just around. And I think by osmosis or whatever, I absorbed all of that stuff and then just became obsessed with it and took it to extremes. But yeah.
Do you sort of like have early memories of like going to local type shows and stuff when you were younger, or was that something that sort of came later as you kind of got into music when you were a teenager? Or
it would have been junior high.
Okay.
When I got into junior high, I was in French immersion all throughout, and when I I grew up in Wolseley, which is kind of the hippie area of Winnipeg.
Okay.
It was still my favorite neighborhood. It's awesome. I love it there. But I went to when I got to junior high age, so grade 7, a lot of kids just moved over to English school because there was a closer one, and I had to take 2 city buses to get to the nearest French school. So only a few of us did that. Most kids went to the closer English school just because they don't want to have to take a bunch of buses. Yeah. So I didn't know a lot of kids at my junior high, and I met people pretty quick based on music. Like it was, someone would have like a Nirvana shirt or something. It's like, okay, I'm gonna talk to this kid, right?
Yeah.
Or he's got a Soundgarden shirt. So he's like, I have that tape. I'm gonna, this is what. And then those people, some of them are still my friends today. So I mean, I think that, getting into music in a big way through meeting other people who are interested in it, right at an age where you're super susceptible to just suck in all that stuff, right? I think that was when I started going to shows in the first place. And one of the first shows I went to in Winnipeg was, I'm not sure if you've heard of Corefest. Yeah, Corefest was it was a big festival they had every year, very DIY. We have a hill called Garbage Hill, which is it's actually called Westview Park, but it's a hill built on garbage basically. It was a dump at one point, and it's now all grassed over, and it's a beautiful park. But at the bottom of
go ahead.
At the bottom of Garbage Hill was Corefest every year, and it was like this kind of DIY stage. All these punk bands and folk singers and metal bands and like Propaganda used to play there. It was just this awesome thing, and that was one of the first shows I went to when I was like 13 years old. And we just sat there, me and a friend of mine, all day, and just watched local band after local band after local band, and watched these people in their 20s like basically running everything and selling merch. And I still have some of the tapes I bought of those shows.
Yeah, cool.
And like that was super influential. The idea that, I think at that point, that's when I realized that I could do this. Like it wasn't just being a musician or playing in a band wasn't just something you had to be famous to do. Because at that point I was like, okay, you have to be like Bryan Adams or something. Right? You have to be able to play a show. And then it was like, wait, no, you don't. You can be just some guy down the street who has a guitar and learn 3 chords. And now you're playing a festival in this park that used to be a garbage dump.
Yeah.
For hundreds of people.
And was Corefest, it was free, right?
I think it cost a couple bucks,
or $1 or something.
Yeah, it was really cheap. Like I don't remember it now, but if it wasn't free, it was like $2 or something. Yeah.
I want to say maybe on Greg and Keith's podcast
they've mentioned it.
Yeah, they must have mentioned it, and that's probably where I heard about it. So shout out to Unscripted Moments. That's sort of how part of how we sort of connected, and again speaks to kind of that connection through music, right? Like
for sure,
there's all these people out there kind of rallying around their love of Propaganda, and so you kind of cross paths. So it's kind of a really neat thing. I like what you said about sort of seeing sort of Corefest or other shows that were happening at the time and realizing like I can just go out and do this. Like that's the whole DIY thing, realizing really all you have to do is just want to do something and then go do it.
That's right.
It might not be huge and awesome and amazing right off the bat, right? Just like a podcast, your first 10 episodes, maybe nobody even listens to it.
Yeah.
But it just takes time, right? It grows. And it's the same with being in a band. You get, the only people who come to your first 5 shows are your parents and maybe 2 friends or whatever. And then just over time, it just kind of grows.
Hopefully.
Hopefully. I mean, we never got too much farther than that, but
no, either did I. But Corefest doesn't exist anymore. It's been done for, I think that the guy who was running it moved away at some point, and then it just never happened again. But there's still lots of local free outdoor things that happen every summer in Winnipeg.
Right.
And I've been trying to get my kids to go to those. It's different. It's not the same as Corefest. It's not big festivals, but there's lots of small kind of even backyard shows or front porch shows or community center outdoor things. And I take them to as many as I can, even if it's not maybe the type of music I want to see. There's usually one person on a bill I'm interested in or I've interviewed and I want to check them out live. Drag my kids along and they have fun at them, whether they actually, I don't know how much the music impacts them or not, but they enjoy going to these things and listening to stuff and just hanging out in a group of people and watching music. So I don't know what impact that'll have on them as they get older, but I mean, for me, it really did. Corefest and other shows like that were just a huge inspiration for me. So
yeah, just having that kind of positive experience in an environment like that, I think is really all you can ask for a kid, right?
Yeah.
Just exposure to different things, which is so great. So you kind of talked about you were it was always in the plan to have kids.
Yeah.
Did you have fears about becoming a dad? Do you remember like kind of, before your your oldest daughter was born, thinking about like, I guess things you were scared about?
Oh yeah, for sure. Because I had never held a baby until my first.
Well, yeah,
kid was
you
born,
were,
so
you were like, I guess I would say relatively speaking, pretty young when you had
I
your
was in my
first.
mid 20s. Yeah, I was like
Yeah.
turning 26, I think. So yeah, it was
Were you
and I
kind
have
of the
a
first of your friends to have kids?
for the most part, yeah. There's a couple who had some of them really early, but I still have some friends who are having kids now, and they're
Yeah.
almost 40, right? So I mean, it's definitely it was early in
Yeah.
my social group, and so I don't know what I was doing. You
Right.
know, I knew that I wanted a kid, and my wife wanted a kid, and like it was obviously that we were going to have a kid. But yeah, it was kind of just like, okay, now this is happening. Let's, let's
Yep.
figure this out. And like I know a lot of people would rather wait till they're older, and that's cool too. Like, you know, I don't think there's a right way or a wrong way to do
Yeah.
it. But I don't know. For me, it's good. I'm not even 40 yet, and I've already got a kid in junior high, and like I figure that by the time both of mine are adults, I'll be in my 50s still, and
Right.
so I'll be relatively young, and I kind of like that about it. It's kind of means I'll get freedom from my kids, because that sounds horrible, but I'll be able to have different experiences with them before I'm too old.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
experience them being young adults and things too, right? Before I'm like, you know, they're wheelchair bound or senile or
Right.
whatever, right?
Yeah, and like so I totally agree with you. I mean, I don't think you have to feel I guess guilty for saying, or for thinking about, you know, good things about being away from your kids. I think
Yeah,
it's like, it's healthy to have time away from your kids sometimes, right? And for some of the reasons we talked about before, you know, sort of pursuing your passions, or, you know,
right.
doing whatever you need for your kind of individuality and self-care. That part is important. Actually, Christian has talked about he's divorced, so he's not with his son's mom, and so splits time, and has talked about how in the beginning that was really, really tough, but having that sort of week off actually does a lot for his sort of self-care now, and works really well for their dynamic, right? So for everybody it's kind of different, I guess. Even like you're talking about with age, I think it kind of happens when it happens, right? Depending on whatever circumstances, and you kind of figure it out and make it work. So yeah, that's really cool. So it's neat that you sort of always knew that was kind of in the plan. And I mean, talk about DIY, like you did it yourself. You went and made a kid, so you got to figure it out, right? It's the same thing. And a lot of that just sort of comes naturally, I guess. You kind of,
well, you figure it out on the fly, which is the same as anything else. I think the DIY thing is honestly like, I mean, I definitely came from a punk scene. I was in ska bands and stuff in the 90s and everything. And like, I was never a punk, but I was from the punk scene. And I think the thing that I took the most out of that is the DIY part of it. And that's always been kind of a really, really important factor in my life, is the idea that if you want to do something, especially something creative, just do it. I mean, there's tons of stuff I'm terrible at. And, but I'm sure if I put in the time, like I put in for the podcast, you know, if it was something I was passionate about, I probably could do some semblance of it, and maybe that would be, you know, something else interesting.
Do you play or make music still, like even just as a hobby at all, or?
No, I don't have time. I honestly don't have time. I wish I would. There's often times where I think that I would love to start a band, but I don't.
Where would you fit that in?
I wouldn't fit it in. And I mean, like, it wouldn't be fair to other people I was in a band with, because, you know, I'm usually the weakest link in the band anyway. So I mean, if I'm not showing up and I'm dragging everyone down by not being as good at music as they are, it wouldn't be cool. So
right, yeah, you can't do everything, that's for sure. I just was sort of curious if you even just like, you know, strum on a guitar or something like that, just to.
I mean, I guess I have instruments here that I play around with every once in a while, but it's super, super casual, just kind of plunking away and not really, you know, not writing songs or anything like that.
Yeah, cool. So tell me a little bit about what I guess, got 2 kids, heading into sort of being teenagers for your oldest. Over that period of time, what's been the most rewarding thing about being a dad?
I think just kind of being there as they learn things. I think a lot of people would probably agree with that too, right? It's just being present as they discover things and as they learn how to do things. And I mean, like I said, with the library thing, reading has always been a big deal. I remember being when my oldest kid was little, I thought, if she can't read by the time she's in kindergarten, I will have failed as a parent, which is dumb. But I mean, because there's no date for that. But so I really kind of pushed the reading thing, and she ended up loving it, and they both read constantly. So that part of it was cool, that, I felt maybe a little bit like I was being too pushy on, like, you got to read, you got to read. But then they both took to it so well, and they're constantly reading. And
oh my God,
that's super rewarding. Like, my 8-year-old is reading novels and stuff later. Like, she was reading a textbook about bird, like like a science book about birds.
That's
like
awesome.
a 300-page thing. So I feel like that kind of stuff is really rewarding, knowing that that's another thing I did as a kid constantly too. You'd never see me without a book in my hand, and
right,
having that kind of passed on to my kids is nice to see, because it meant a lot to me. And I know that I know how important reading can be to anyone, and just seeing them like taking to it like crazy is awesome.
It's so important, right? And it's like, I probably never really thought about the importance of reading, like over the first few years of my daughter's life. And so my daughter Elise is just about to turn 6, so she's in grade 1. So like learning how to read over the last couple of years.
Yeah.
And I actually, like, thinking about it, I almost like tear up thinking about it, how amazing it is to see someone learn how to read.
Yeah,
it like
cool.
opens up the whole world to you. Like before that, it's like things are so limited. And so like now, like driving the car down the street, she'll like see a billboard and read the sign. Or, the other day she's like, we drive by IKEA. She's like, IKEA, it's like,
it's awesome.
So awesome. It's so great. And
because it's such a crazy thing to think about, is being able to read anything is bizarre. You can decipher these symbols and like make sense out of them without even thinking either. Like, it just kind of immediately happens. It's such a cool thing.
Yeah. And as a parent, like, I really struggled with how to, like, I guess where to start with reading. Reading was really tough in the beginning when we were kind of first talking about, like, do you remember that experience too, of like right in the beginning?
Yeah, because you kind of hope that it's easy to teach them, right? Because it's not.
No,
it's not
it's
at all
not.
easy to teach them. But it definitely seems like, okay, well, we got this book. I mean, how hard can it be, right? She's a smart kid, but no, it takes a while. You got to go through all the very slow steps of learning all the letters and the sounds and everything. And yeah, it's difficult, but once you see them starting to do it, it's so cool, right? Because it's like, even small words, you're like, oh, this is awesome. You know what that means? That's
Yeah, and progress is like really slow in the beginning, but then it just like
and then
takes
suddenly
off. Yeah. I agree. I would totally agree with you on that one. That like that's such a neat thing to see, and just sort of learning in general. And when they start going to school and come home and tell you things that they learned that you didn't teach them before that, I had all the control over what they knew.
Yeah,
and now they're coming at home and telling me about the planets and stuff like that.
Well, they know stuff I don't know.
Yeah,
all the time. My especially my oldest, because she's in grade 7 now, and like she's learning stuff that either I forgot about or I never knew in the first place. It's kind of cool.
Yeah, it's really cool. So you talked about your dad a little bit too, and kind of your relationship with your dad, and I guess maybe having some of those early experiences around music with your dad. Is your dad still around?
Yeah, he's still around. Yeah.
And so is your dad a rad granddad?
He is, yeah. And my kids call him granddad too, which is
cool.
Yeah, it's they my kids are actually really close to him, which is nice too, because like I had a very great experience with him growing up, so it's nice that they can have him in their lives as well. And it's always been my dad's from England, so it was always different growing up. That I mean, we're a very Canadian family, but it was having an immigrant dad was a somewhat unique experience among some of my friends, and I think it made it. I don't know if it made my relationship with him closer, just because it was kind of weird. He was interested in totally different stuff. Like, I mean, we'd watch soccer and I would read these English comics, which my kids read now and stuff. And like, it was a lot of that was just different. And I think that maybe made more of an impact on me, because we weren't doing the same stuff that everyone else was doing.
Yeah, it's like
I'm not sure.
Connection to a culture that just or some elements of culture that aren't as prevalent in Canada, I guess, right?
I mean, it's pretty prevalent still. I mean, England and Canada are very close, obviously same language, essentially the same culture and stuff too. But yeah, there's some weird like things that I think came with that I still cling on to, despite being living in Canada for almost 40 years and not really having that much connection other than some cousins on Facebook and stuff over there, right? It's still kind of like when the World Cup comes around or Olympics, I'm wearing the England colors.
Yeah, cool. Cool. I like that. Has your how has your relationship with your dad sort of evolved since you've had kids? What's that experience sort of been like?
I think I get it more.
Yeah, me too.
Like I think you just kind of realize like, oh, this is what I was like, as a kid, and this is what he had to deal with, figuring all this out because I'm the oldest kid as well, right? So my family. So my dad figured out he went through the exact same shit that I did with my oldest daughter. Just basically like, what do you do with a baby? How do you do anything? Because he didn't have kids before that either, right? I was the first one, so it's the same idea of just like, this is completely new. You got to figure it out as you go along. And so I think that I remember reading actually an interview with Steve Earle, the country singer, and he said that when he had his first kid, he immediately went to his dad and apologized for every shitty thing he'd ever done, like the day his first kid was born, right? Just because you realize like, oh wait, this is what this is. Like this was me at one point, and all that crap I put you through, now I'm gonna have to deal with it, right? So it's actually kind of
I was just thinking about this the other day, that it's like kind of almost a sad thing that like it takes us so long to realize how important our parents or grandparents or whatever are to us. In the case of like me, I like with my grandparents especially, I just was like a selfish little kid basically up until the time they passed away. Like, and then it's only afterwards I realized like, fuck, I never asked them like anything about their life growing up, or they were just there for me basically. And it's kind of like a depressing thought that like, it takes you, I guess, until you're whatever 30 years old or older to kind of really put those pieces together, and hopefully you have enough time to, I guess, I don't know what it is, like bring some, I guess, respect or whatever to that relationship afterwards. I don't, that's not really the right word.
I know what you mean though. It's kind of like you take them for granted, and you don't mean
you totally take it for granted.
You think they'll always be there, right? And I mean, like both my grandfathers were in the war. I would have loved to find out more about that. Now I'm very curious, but at the time it was like, oh cool, they were in the war. Like, they fought the Nazis. Cool. That's awesome. But
that
was about all I thought about it, right? And it's like, I'm sure they went through some horrible and really exciting and, all kinds of action and stuff that would be really fascinating to hear about and maybe even record, but they're long dead now. And I missed the chance. It's like, as you get older, you realize the importance of like passing that information down. And I always envy people who, when I talk to them, they know so much about sort of their family history and things like that. I'm like, geez, I was just a like shithead growing up. I never asked, right? I never made it a priority of that. So it's neat to sort of to have the grandparents around, I guess, and sort of to see them interact with the kids too. So that must be kind of neat for you to see your dad with your kids. It is cool.
It's I kind of find that relationship really interesting, like there's something different there, right, than a parent and a child, the grandparent and a grandchild.
Well, it's different now than it would have been even 20, 30 years ago too, right? Because I mean, like age-wise, like my dad is going to be 70 soon, but he doesn't seem like he's 70. Like when I was a kid, someone who was 70 seemed like they were, on the way out, right? And and now, I mean, someone who's in their 60s or 70s, they seem like they're pretty active and they do stuff still, and they're like going out, and it's totally different. So I think that it's nice that our generation's kids can grow up with grandparents who are still, for the most part, pretty, like vital and stuff, and really have the capacity to be involved there because they're not in a home or something, right?
And I think there's more sort of like, this probably speaks to like the whole sort of societal thing around like gender roles and stuff like that too, and just sort of showing your emotions and things that 10 years ago were harder, 20 years ago were basically non-existent, 30 years ago were totally not even something you would even think about, sort of displaying your emotions and your love for your your kid or your grandchild or whatever.
Which seems crazy, right, to think about crazy. Now, but
and so it is neat to sort of, I guess, get to see the grandparents experience that. So
it is cool.
Awesome. Well, Sam, like I'm so fascinated by what you do with your show, the history that you sort of captured with your show. I'm so thankful that you came on to talk about your show and about being a dad. I want to ask you, like, what's next for you? What's on the horizon? Is it just more grinding with Witchpolice Radio? What's exciting?
It's gonna be more grinding. I can't stop, won't stop. I'm way too deep now to slow down, And I think people would be disappointed if I did, honestly, like,
Yeah.
for any reason, if I stopped doing this, because not that I have some massive, listener base. I mean, doing such a niche show that's specifically Winnipeg music and Manitoba music is just necessarily going to have a fairly small, but hopefully loyal audience, right? But it's just, I think that everyone I know knows that I've been so kind of focused on this in my free time when I'm not with my kids or working, that I think people would be bummed out if I stopped. So, and I would be bummed out if I stopped.
Yeah.
Because it's just, I'm obviously passionate about it, right?
Yeah, I love it. And I didn't ask, I guess, so you talked about the Winnipeg, is it Manitoba Podcast Festival?
The Manitoba Podcast Festival, yeah.
So is that's still going? How does that sort of work?
Well, this year we kind of are taking a break. We're doing just an Ask a Podcaster session, so people can come on and talk to a bunch of people from the community. But in the past 3 years, we did 2 at the Park Theater in Winnipeg, in-person events with some panels on stage and the opportunity for people to talk to different podcasters. And then last year was virtual because of the pandemic. And then this year, because life got in the way for so many of us, we've kind of just gone to this small session we're doing in early December. But it really was started by a friend of mine. Well, okay, I don't know how much time you have.
No, I've got time. Yeah,
devote to this, but there's a guy named Stephen Richard. He is he's a former wrestler. He is a former podcaster. He now works full time in radio, and he had a podcast called the Ever Sick Podcast. Okay. And he randomly invited me to be on the show. We didn't know each other, and I went down to his producer's house, who I had met before, and he is the producer his name's Roger. He's the founder of the Indigenous Film Summit. So he had all this experience organizing events. And so after our interview on the show, me and Stefan and Roger sat down and started talking about we should do something. This was such a great time. We got along so well. Yeah. We're both all fascinated by the same thing. We should put something together. And that eventually we started hanging out once a month and trying to plan stuff. And that eventually turned into the first podcast festival. And over time, our regular monthly meetings turned into, let's go to Robin's Donuts and just have an open invitation for anyone who is interested in podcasting or has a show or wants to start a show. And it kept growing and growing. And now we have a pretty strong core group of people who just show up on the virtual meetings once a month, and they do all kinds of different shows. And some of them are as experienced as I am or more. Some of them are, brand new to it. And we have one kid who's 13 years old, and he interviews rock stars. Basically, he's had some extremely high profile. He had a guy from the Tragically Hip on his show. Whoa. He interviews all kinds of it's a music show, but it's not regional like mine. He just interviews whoever. And I think the fact that he's that young is almost kind of the hook for a lot of people to get into a show, because this kid it's baffling that he's that good at doing this at such a young age. So I mean, we have competition for sure.
Yeah, that's awesome.
But it just really kind of developed from the three of us wanting to hang out and do something into now this thing. And the lineup of people involved changes all the time, and there's a few core people who have been involved for 3 or 4 years now, and it's nice to see that we've become friends with each other. I would hang out with these people, no question, right? Yeah. And it's again that community thing. So we're hoping that next year in 2022 we can bring it back, maybe in person again. Yeah, those were a lot of fun. If not, we'll do a full-on virtual festival. Actually, Greg and Keith from Unscripted Moments were in the virtual one of the panels last year. Oh, okay. That I moderated. So we had them, and we had Ryan McMahon, who does the Thunder Bay podcast, and he does he's tons of podcasts over the years. And we talked about growing your audience, and it was basically a panel show about that. And so that's on the internet, and that kind of will live forever as a way to hopefully encourage new podcasters. But yeah, it's basically just a way to share the passion with other people. And unfortunately, this year is just everyone's lives are so in upheaval because of the pandemic and stuff that it's not going to happen. But hoping to get it back next year.
Yeah, well, I really like that. I like obviously that connection to your community and how this is kind of all about your community, sort of regionally. And I also like. We kind of touched on, this wasn't really related, but we kind of touched on having a big guest on your podcast. And that's something I really love about your show is, you have some big guests. You had Biff Naked on recently. You've had the guys for Propaganda, some, really big guests. You had Fred Penner on the
Tom
podcast.
Jackson recently too.
Yeah, Tom Jackson. Yeah. These are big guests, but then you have the little kind of local brand new bands on there too, and artists,
and those are often better. I mean, not in no way to talk shit about those big name guests, because they were awesome too. I mean, like Biff Naked was like delightful to talk to. She was just fantastic. But some of the bands that they've played like 2 shows in someone's basement, they are so excited about being on a podcast that their enthusiasm just comes through, and they're way more likely to share the shit out of the episode and just like promote the fact I was on the show, come listen. And sometimes those numbers like are surprisingly high compared to someone who is they've sold hundreds of thousands of records or whatever, because those people are so pumped that someone wanted to give them the time to talk about what they do. So I like those. I like talking to some weird punk band that I've never heard of, that I hear one song on the internet, I'm like, oh, this is great, like what is it, who are these people? And they're half my age, and they have no idea about any of the history of the local punk scene, so all of my frames of reference are completely different from theirs. And it's cool to sort of see like the sort of passage of time of the Winnipeg music scene too, because I'm definitely rooted in 90s, early 2000s when I was going to most shows, and so my sort of reference points for venues and festivals and stuff like that, it's most of the kids who are in their 20s, they have no idea what it is, like, and they missed all of that. Like a lot of them have never been to the Albert, and I mean the Royal Albert is such a like iconic Winnipeg punk venue, but it was closed for so long that many of the people on the show, they don't know what it is. It's cool to sort of see this, like they're still doing the same thing, the DIY punk stuff, but it's from a completely different angle, and it's really cool to talk to them.
You're like the rad dad of the Winnipeg or Manitoba music scene, is what it feels like. That's kind of what you're describing.
I guess so, yeah. I mean, like I don't want to be. I mean, I definitely have people like Fred Penner, for example, who have been around Winnipeg's music scene for decades before I was even born, right? Yeah. And I mean, like the guys from Propaganda, they're a decade or so older than me as well, and they've experienced stuff that I've only read about, in books and documentaries about Winnipeg music. But yeah, I don't know. It's cool to see that no matter what changes as far as venues and styles and all of that, the DIY punk thing, whatever that sounds like in 2021, still will exist, and it'll exist in 2031 and 2041. And for whatever reason, that thing of playing in a basement and making a bunch of loud noise and making a terrible recording and showing it to people proudly, that's never going to change. And so I like being part of that continuum, I guess, however it can be.
Yeah, I love that. That's so awesome. Well, thank you so much for stopping by and talking about your podcast and your community, talking about being a rad dad, talking about your kids. Any advice out there? We always end by asking if you have any advice out there for dads listening. So maybe current dads, new dads, dads to be.
I just, the only advice, I don't know if it's advice even, I think it's kind of, most dads I think experience this, but just the idea of finding out what your kids are interested in and encouraging them to do it, whatever it is. Like, you don't have to like it, you don't have to understand it, but if you see something that they're pumped about, like get pumped for them. And I mean, my kids aren't big athletes, but I mean, they both got really into rugby a few years ago, and I'd never played rugby. I played soccer and hockey my whole life, but just going and watching them play rugby was awesome. I didn't even know how the game was played, but yeah, it was like getting into that is cool because they're enjoying it. So now I want to see how this works and learn about it. And I think really, just being excited about what your kids are excited about.
Cool. I love that. Thanks, man. Appreciate your time. And it's been great talking with you. And I'm looking forward to, listening to lots more of your episodes and going into your back catalog a little bit more as well. So
there's a lot there. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks, man. Cool. Appreciate it.